Hi everyone, it's the tiniest of Logans back with another video for you. So we're going to be talking about the new AMD Raven Ridge APUs. So we've got kind of mildly reworked Ryzen cores in there. It's kind of like an interim stage between the old Ryzen stuff and then the Ryzen 2 stuff that's coming a little bit later on in the year. So we've got kind of like marginal increases and changes and stuff going on there, but the big introduction is the fact that we've got Vega APU graphics on these new units. Now we've got a Ryzen 3 and a Ryzen 5. The Ryzen 3 is a dual core. It boosts up to 3.4 gigahertz and then 3.7 gigahertz, which is slightly higher than the Ryzen 3 1200. It's basically the same as a 1300X, but with Vega graphics on it. And then the Ryzen 5 2400G is essentially, well, it's actually a little bit better than the 1500X. And we've got 4 cores and 8 threads on the 2400G Ryzen 5. And then we've got the 2200G, which is the Ryzen 3, is just 4 cores and none of the SMT or simultaneous multi-threading, whatever you'd like to call it. The 3 comes in at $100 and the 5 comes in at $170. Now AMD UK are not specifying local prices at the time of launch. Now that, for the way stuff has gone in the past, always makes me a little bit nervous, because normally when that happens it's because they don't want to tell you the price and it's going to be higher than you think. So we never know. Let's face it, if a company can get a product together like this, then they should have prices for launch sorted as well. So all we've got are dollar prices, and we've just got to hope for the best. What I would say is, worst case scenario, take them on a dollar to pound exact exchange rate. So £100 and £170, and if they're any less, then okay. But I wouldn't necessarily just go and put a USD to GBP converter in on Google, because you will not get those prices. So the other thing that they say in the dual channel support for the memory, as with all CPUs, what you kind of need to do is ignore it, because when they say that's what's supported, they always go further than that anyway. And we have had 3200 megahertz running on these absolutely fine. To push past 3200 megahertz, it's going to come down to many things. It's going to come down to the board that you're using and your abilities as well. I know a lot of people have been buying, like, for argument's sake, 2400 memory and then overclocking it. And I always see people moaning about the fact, oh, this motherboard can't overclock my XXX memory up to 3200 megahertz. Well, the thing is unless you've tried it in other boards, you're never going to know whether the board is your problem, or, let's face it, peeps, it's the memory. The memory is only ever rated for the speed that you buy it at. You can normally get a little bit out of it, but I've seen people expecting 2400 memory to go to 3200. Now, if you do get to do that, then you are really lucky, but you shouldn't expect it. We've got 3200 megahertz kits that we use. We tried G-Skill kits, Flare, and the RGB stuff, and we tried some Corsair Dominator Platinum and Corsair LPX. Now, when we test, say for argument's sake, above 3200 megahertz, what we'll quite often do is drop a 3600 megahertz kit in, put it to 3200, so that we know that the board can run it okay, because we know the board can run 3200, and it literally can be the difference between a kit. So, like with some memory kits, you might not get a specific memory kit. Even if it's made for 2400, it might just not start in a board. And you can still get some, like hinky issues with some of the Agisa stuff, although they have rolled out a lot of updates. So when we tested this, we tested it on the Asus B350 Prime board. We didn't use the Gigabyte board that came with the kit itself. It's the little ITX one. And the reason for that is I wouldn't necessarily suggest that anyone went and bought it. It's not going to be too bad with the Ryzen 3 APU on this, but the tiny little VRM heatsink that's on it If you tried using the quad core and with that quad core you then wanted to overclock as well, you would have to have a downdraft cooler on it to make it run. Also, the BIOSes with them can be horrendous, and I've had no end of issues with them in the past. So the board that came in the actual box, it was literally just a straight away, no, I'm not using that. The other thing is that I need to use the board that I've tested the other CPUs on, so I need to keep things consistent. It always makes me worry when you get someone like AMD or even Intel sending you boards with tweaked BIOSes on and all that sort of stuff. So what I did is I used the B350 Prime, which is what I use for like the Ryzen 3s and the lower end Ryzen 5s as well. And then I went on the Asus website and I downloaded the latest BIOS off of the website that you guys can get, because I kind of need to test it the way you guys can get it anyway. AMD really weren't very happy with me about this. We had a little bit of a row about it. And they always kind of say, no, we sent you this and we want you to do that. And then they saw the scores that I was getting that were better than the ones that they were getting, and they were like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe we don't mind about it after all. But anyway, so I've done what I wanted to do. It's never popular, and I always create a fuss about it. But it's just the way I feel comfortable with doing it. So we've got all of this. Now, straight away, what I will say is this is the cooler. It's the little Spire cooler that comes with it. It's the standard one. It's the one that comes in the box. A lot of people do ask about the standard cooler and stuff like that. So one of the things I will say is it's very different on each of the CPUs, because obviously, or APUs, because obviously you've got one with 4 cores and then you've got one with 4 cores and 8 threads. So we do two different sort of tests when it comes to an APU, because you can't just do just a CPU test, because this has got graphics on it as well, and it's going to be pretty much getting sold as something that you should be using the graphics on. Unlike some of the CPUs that you can get from the other camp that always come with a GPU on them anyway, but nobody ever really uses them. These are specifically being sold as an all-in-one solution and no dedicated graphics. And now, what I remember, I know a lot of you have asked about hybrid Crossfire. So the fact that you can use the CPU, the iGPU on the GPU itself, and then you get a dedicated graphics card and you kind of crossfire the two. Well, that is completely turned off on these new APUs. There is no option to do it whatsoever. Before, it was very, very locked down. We had to have like one specific GPU that could do it. With these, it's not there at all. Now, that's going to cause a lot of people to kind of get upset. I don't think many of you that are going to get upset would have ever done it anyway. You just kind of like the idea about it. But the way AMD think about it is if you are going to buy an APU and then you go and buy a graphics card, you're just going to use the dedicated graphics. I think it would be kind of nice if you could do some maybe kind of like very quick switching in that. If you were online or you were like, you know, not necessarily like watching films and stuff like that, use the iGPU. I think it would be nice if you went on to something which triggered 3D, so gaming specific, or you could choose specific like a folder. Anything that opens in this folder, you name it games, anything that opens in this folder, you use the dedicated graphics card for, and then you switch. I know that would then cause like loads of problems with the cables that you were using and stuff like that. But considering we used to do hybrid graphics and you didn't necessarily need to plug it into the graphics card, there could be like software ways around it. But I think that might have been a nice trade-off other than just a flat no. Anyway, the only other thing that I do need to talk about, and that's in line with the specifications, is the APU only has 4 graphics cards, only has 8 PCI Express lanes available for it. Now, I know people are then instantly like, why is it not 16? Well, to be honest with you, it's an APU. So if you're going to be buying an APU and then adding a graphics card, then the likelihood is that your budget is going to be slightly lower and you're not going to be buying then said graphics card that's going to saturate 8 lanes. So that's the kind of thinking behind it. If you are going to want more than 8 lanes, big beefy graphics card, then you shouldn't be buying an APU in the first place, and you should be thinking about a high Ryzen 5, or to be fair, a Ryzen 7. And when I say Ryzen 7, there is only really one that you should be thinking about buying, and that's the 1700. Buy the 1700, overclock it, save your money. You don't need to get the 1700X or the 1800X. They're literally mute products, and it doesn't matter how cheap they are. Just genuinely don't mind. If you can get one to 3.9 gigahertz with decent temps, you're absolutely on to a winner. So back to the thermal tests with the little baby cooler. The three, we're going to call them the 3 and the 5. The 3 with GPU related tests, which was Unigine 1920 by 1080, 8 times AA. So a GPU based workload, but it does tickle the CPU in a little bit. This is how we test our graphics card, so this is why we're doing it. 41 degrees on the 3, 49 degrees on the 5. CPU dedicated tests though, OCCT, no LinPack or anything like that, no AVX, 77 degrees on the 3 and then 85 degrees on the 5. So one thing that I would say is if you're going to be looking at this as like a maybe a Plex server, and there's a possibility of you doing quite a lot of transcoding, or you like Blender, or you like to take your DVDs and transcode them and stuff like that, one of the things I would say personally, if you're going to be doing CPU orientated stuff, which you can still do on a low-end CPU, you know, just because your budget isn't massive doesn't mean that you're not going to be trying these things. I would say upgrade the cooler. If you're going to be using this as a predominantly online machine with the odd bit of casual low-end gaming, we will talk about gaming performance in a bit, then the cooler will be adequate for you people. It's only when you really start stressing those CPU cores that it does seem to get really hot, which I was actually quite happy about, because I would have assumed personally it would have been the other way around. So there's your thermal tests. Then I'll pop the graph up for the power draw from the wall. That was done in the exact same way, and we actually take the results for the GPU and the CPU power draw at the same time that we do the thermal tests. So the power draw from the wall there, I would say, is healthily low enough for a decent low-end system, that it's not going to be creating any like huge dramas, let's say, with electricity bills. But to be honest with you, you'd have to have a monster PC to notice any big impact on your electricity bill, unless it was running flat out the whole time that you had it. Now we do have some like benchmarks and stuff to get through. One of the things that you do need to know about is we did do some sort of like overclocking with it, but we didn't test the overclocking with it because we didn't get enough time with the units itself to get everything done in out the way. They both did do 4 gigahertz absolutely fine though. So both the 3 and the 5 did hit 4 gigahertz. Trying to get them to 4.1 didn't really get anything from, you know, any further than that at all. So it's 4 gigahertz was an absolute top end. So it felt exactly like Ryzen. There were no magic like 4.2, 4.4 gigahertz overclocks coming through. So it was just 4. With that, we did get them to pass absolutely fine, but it's not something you will be able to do on the stock cooler at all. You will need a decent cooler if you're looking to do that. So the 5 turbos up to 3.9 as you've seen, and the 3 turbos up to 3.7. What you do need to realise though is that is just on one core. Now they do have a multi-stage boost now, so you've got a better ability of getting more cores boosting at a higher percentage than you did with the old Ryzen stuff. But when we do our overclocks, we lock all of the cores in at the overclock. So we had all 4 cores at 4 gigahertz, and then that obviously translates into the threads as well. But when you do that with these, they do get really warm, so that you do need to consider the standard cooler that comes with it is not good enough. I would say an absolute minimum that you're going to need is a healthy 120mm fan-based tower cooler. But even then, you should be prepared if you're going to be doing benchmarking or CPU-based intensive usage. You're probably even going to need to start thinking about maybe investing even more money into a twin tower cooler or even water cooling. Now, when we do start saying those kind of things out loud with a £100 CPU, things are then going to get expensive very quickly, because you could be talking about spending like 75–80% of the money that you spent on a CPU then on cooling. But then what you also need to think about is, if you buy a decent cooler, it's going to make your usage of said product a lot better, because it's going to mean that you're going to have cooler temperatures and quieter usage when it is under load, rather than having a, you know, like a flipping tornado blowing by the side of your ears. So move on to the X265 benchmark. This is obviously quite handy for those of you out there that I said about transcoding. We've dropped these in now. The results that are in the graphs are the results that we have for said specific benchmark. So if you're wondering, we haven't retested every single one of these, because otherwise we'd be there forever. The Ryzen stuff, we did do a batch of retests when one of the Gisa updates come out, and they're the results that you'll get in those graphs, but they've not been tested like since launch. The problem with that is, with the amount of CPUs and stuff that we got, it would literally take us a couple of weeks of solid testing, and we only got these CPUs, well, it was less than a week ago. So we've not had a great deal of time to be able to get stuff done as it is. So that's the X265 stuff. You can see it sits fairly well. The fact that it was scoring better than the Ryzen 3 I thought was kind of nice, but that does show the increased clock speed and boost that has been able to do that. Cinebench as well sits in really nice. I actually thought that the APU 5 did very well. When you look at the score above it, was a 1500X overclock. Blender, this is one of our own custom ones. This is an absolute killer for either of them. So the fact that it's not at the bottom of the graph does well. And again, this is really coming down to the fact of those clock speeds being marginally increased over the 1200 and the 300s. PC Mark 10, quickly run through, and then we get to the gaming tests. Now, we wouldn't normally, and we haven't done a lot of APU gaming tests, so we put these through just to give you some numbers that you can relate to. But for me, the big one here was the fact that you can, and these are all played at 1080p, you can play Overwatch at medium. Now, we did have to go careful with the Overwatch because of the fact it can do the resolution scaling and all that sort of stuff. So we had to go in and manually force medium settings rather than just doing the medium drop down. So this is absolutely manually forced medium, and I think Overwatch there is an absolute cracker when you think about it. But the other one a little bit further down, even Total Warhammer 2, maybe not with the minimum on the 3, but the Total Warhammer 2 on the 5 I think did very, very well. So, lots of talking from me, but let's face it, at the end of the day, they do just come in boxes like this. It is just a CPU, and it is just an entry-level product. One of the things that you do need to know is there is a link underneath that you can go and see the full review on the OC3D website. You can go and look through all of the other graphs, because there are a lot of other graphs. And you can go and pick through all the tests and decide on the stuff that is most relevant to you. But at the end of the day, I would say the gaming performance in these was better than I was genuinely expecting. The temperatures for the GPU side of it were better than I was expecting as well. The CPU intensive side of things, the cooler just isn't up to scratch, but it's a reference cooler. It is tiny. It does come in on a budget. So to be honest with you, I wasn't expecting, you know, it to be able to cope as well. Overclocking, healthy. You can get some nice boosts if you're willing to put the effort in. But if you're building an APU sort of style rig, then it could be, you know, a little bit out of reach to be able to keep these as cool as you'll need to when turning volts up and you know, forcing cores to run quicker. Because the problem with this is you don't ever get all 4 cores running at 3.9 gigahertz. You only ever get 1. And the problem is when we go in and we go, no, we want you to run at 4 gigahertz and we want to pummel all these volts in all at once, is they do get hot very quick. So if you do want to get one and have a play with it, then you're seriously going to need to still keep an eye on the clock, keep an eye on your temperatures. And it's the same with them you know, with all of the Ryzen ones really. They do prefer to be kept a little bit cooler than some of the competition, but it's just something that you need to keep in mind. You know, we get so used to a certain temperature being the limit, but you will find these, when they get a bit warm, that they can fall over, and by fall over I mean become unstable. And it's not that the overclock's unstable, it's they've just got a little bit warmer than they prefer. So yeah, make sure you get some decent cooling, and if you do get decent cooling, then that's going to mean that it's going to run cooler and probably quieter for you. So it's just going to be nicer. It's going to be a bit of a balancing act. You can always pick up second-hand AIOs on eBay and stuff. You can actually buy relatively good AIOs for like 60 or 70 pounds now, which yes is a lot of money, but if you've got a 240mm AIO on one of these, it's not even going to matter if it's going to be a low-end one. It will serve you really well. So the long and short of it was, we thought they were actually quite good. The boosts in the graphs over the 1200 and the 1300 that you could see was purely based on the fact that they're running a slightly higher clock speed, which works out kind of nicely. The 5 actually did really well against the 1500X and just CPU part as well, so I was quite impressed with that as well. Really, once you factor in the fact that you can do a bit of, you know, low-end gaming, we obviously stressed it out as well, and we did a 1080 result. Some people will say, why don't you do 900? With all due respect, 900, that's console territory. And this also, remember that with console territory, they can, if it's a stressful game, they can step them back even further and turn stuff down. So the fact that we were getting Overwatch on this, no dedicated GPU, being able to play at medium settings, which yes, isn't amazing, but for like a build it and forget about it part, I didn't think that was that bad. And obviously with Overwatch, it's one of the games that does look okay when it's being played at lower settings anyway. So it did very well. So the long and short of it is, it's a value for money for both of them. They would work relatively well as like, for say, like a Plex server, if you were thinking about that as well, because you get the cores there to help you with the transcoding. But if you're going to be using that and you know that you're going to be doing transcoding to stream to online or a specific device that you've got in your house, then please upgrade the cooler, because otherwise it will drive you nuts. You can obviously have a tickle with the overclocks as well. Now, we didn't play with overclocking the iGPU itself, because what we are going to do is we're going to be doing some more stuff with this at a later date, but we just had to rush the results out. Well, not rush, but we just had to get these results out, and we definitely didn't get enough time to do everything that we wanted to. So you can expect some more content coming. That's another reason why you're seeing me in this environment rather than where I would normally be, because there is an awful lot of stuff on the table that we're working on just out of shot at the moment. You're actually lucky that you got a video for this at all. But value for money award, they did very well. The Vega graphics was better than expected. The only thing, like I said, the only real caveat really is the fact that if CPU intensive stuff, this really isn't good enough. But just go and look about at the sort of options that you can get, or maybe reuse your old one. But yes, well done AMD, cracking little CPU. Apologies about all the chatting and just graphs being bombarded on the screen, but it was the best that I could do in a short period of time. But this is the tiny one out.